A lavish wedding turns into a scandal when the groom's ex appears with a teenage son bearing his striking features. As secrets unravel and tensions rise, buried truths threaten to destroy not one, but two families forever. Let us know where in the world you're watching from today. The summer air hung heavy with anticipation at the Blackwood estate, where James Montgomery's wedding to Victoria Sinclair was meant to be the social event of the season. Crystal champagne flutes caught the late afternoon sun, casting prismatic patterns across the imported marble floors of the grand ballroom. The guest list read like a who's who of industry titans and old money families, each attendee carefully selected to witness the union of two of the city's most prominent families. The ceremony had concluded without incident, and the reception was in full swing when Rebecca Chen walked through the doors. The simple act of her arrival might have gone unnoticed if not for Thomas, her 15-year-old son, walking confidently beside her. The boy's presence sent immediate ripples through the crowd, starting with the older guests who had known James since his youth. James stood near the main table, engaging in conversation with his new father-in-law about their upcoming merger, when the champagne flute slipped from his fingers. The sharp crack of crystal against marble drew all eyes to him, but his gaze remained fixed on Thomas. The resemblance was uncanny. From the characteristic tilt of his head to the slight asymmetry of his smile, Thomas was undeniably his father's son. Victoria, resplendent in her designer wedding gown, watched her new husband's reaction with growing horror. She had spent the last year planning this wedding down to the smallest detail, from the imported peonies to the vintage champagne. Now, with one unexpected arrival, her perfect day was unraveling before her eyes. She observed how James's typically confident posture had crumpled, his face displaying a vulnerability she'd never seen in their 3 years together. The whispers started immediately, spreading through the crowd like wildfire. Elderly Aunt Margaret, who had known James since he was in diapers, nearly fainted when Thomas walked past her table. "It's like seeing a ghost," she muttered to her companion. "The boy moves exactly like James did at that age." James's mother, Eleanor Montgomery, felt her carefully constructed world beginning to crack. Her hand flew to her pearl necklace, a nervous habit she thought she'd abandoned years ago, as she recognized the features she had photographed countless times during James's teenage years. Rebecca's entrance had been calculated, timed perfectly to make maximum impact without disrupting the ceremony itself. She guided Thomas through the crowd with practiced ease, accepting both the obvious stares and poorly concealed whispers with dignity. She had dressed them both appropriately for the occasion, her in a modest but elegant navy blue dress, Thomas in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that emphasized his athletic build, so similar to his father's at that age. The catering staff, usually invisible to the guests, found themselves unwitting audiences to the unfolding drama. They watched as James's college friends did double takes, as business associates quickly pulled out their phones to Google past photos of young James Montgomery, as Victoria's carefully curated wedding hashtag was suddenly flooded with side-by-side comparison photos of James and Thomas. The physical similarities were striking enough, but it was the mannerisms that truly sealed the connection in everyone's minds. Thomas had inherited James's characteristic way of running his hand through his hair when thinking, the slight furrow of his brow when concentrating, and even the distinctive laugh that had earned James the nickname the Hyena during his college years. Each shared trait felt like another nail in the coffin of Victoria's perfectly planned wedding day. Eleanor Montgomery watched in horror as her grandson, there was no point in denying it, the relationship was written in every line of the boy's face, navigated the reception with the same natural charisma that had helped make James such a successful businessman. She saw how guests were already gravitating toward him, drawn by the novelty and scandal of his presence, but kept by his inherited charm and confident bearing. Victoria's carefully planned seating arrangement dissolved into chaos as guests abandoned their assigned tables to get a better look at the newcomers. The wedding planner, sensing disaster, tried desperately to maintain some semblance of order, but the damage was done. The arrival of Rebecca and Thomas had effectively hijacked the entire reception, transforming it from a celebration of James and Victoria's union into something far more complex and dramatic. The photographer, sensing the historical significance of the moment, began discreetly documenting the unfolding scene. His lens captured the micro-expressions that played across James's face: shock, recognition, fear, and something that looked remarkably like longing. He photographed Victoria's gradual transition from confused bride to defensive warrior, her body language shifting as she moved closer to James. marking her territory. And he captured Thomas, unaware of his role as the catalyst, simply taking in the opulent surroundings of a world that could have been his birthright. In the bustling kitchen of the Blackwood estate, Rebecca's sister Marie found herself surrounded by curious catering staff, their tasks momentarily forgotten as she revealed the long-buried story. Rebecca was just starting her residency at Metropolitan Hospital when she found out she was pregnant, Marie explained, her voice low but clear above the clinking of dishes. She was going to tell James that weekend, but then his mother intervened. Marie detailed how Eleanor Montgomery had orchestrated an elaborate scheme to separate the young couple. At the time, James was just beginning to take over his father's company, and Eleanor believed a pregnancy scandal with a medical resident would destroy his credibility with the board. The Montgomery family had deep connections throughout the medical community, and Eleanor had made it clear that Rebecca's career would be over before it began, if she didn't disappear. Meanwhile, in a quiet corner of the estate's garden, Marcus Sinclair, Victoria's brother and a private investigator, was having a tense conversation with his sister's wedding planner. "I found Rebecca 3 months ago," he admitted, checking his phone for incoming messages from his surveillance team. "Victoria needed insurance, something to hold over James if things went south. I just didn't expect her to need it so soon." Marcus had built an extensive file on Rebecca and Thomas over the past months. He had school records, medical histories, and even DNA evidence collected from Thomas's discarded coffee cup outside his high school. He had planned to keep this information as leverage, but Victoria's recent discoveries about James's business practices had accelerated their timeline. The situation grew more complex as Eleanor Montgomery retreated to the estate's library to make an urgent call to Jonathan Pierce, the family's attorney for over 3 decades. "You assured me those documents would keep her quiet forever," Eleanor hissed into the phone, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against the mahogany desk. "I paid her enough to start a new life anywhere in the world, and she signs up to return the money if she ever contacted James." Pierce tried to explain that the legal landscape had changed since then. The non-disclosure agreement Eleanor had forced Rebecca to sign wouldn't hold up in modern courts, especially given the circumstances under which it was signed. Moreover, Thomas's right to know his father's identity would likely supersede any contractual obligations Rebecca had agreed to. In the main hall, Victoria's mother, Catherine Sinclair, was quietly gathering intelligence from her extensive network of society contacts. She had suspected James's playboy past might cause problems, but this situation exceeded her worst expectations. Through carefully worded texts and whispered phone calls, she learned that Rebecca had built a respectable career as a pediatric surgeon in a small city 3 states away. Thomas was an honors student, captain of his school's debate team, and showed promising talent in both athletics and academics, all achievements that would make him a worthy heir to the Montgomery fortune. The web of concealed motives grew more tangled as James's executive assistant, Sarah Chen, no relation to Rebecca, discovered a series of suspicious emails between Victoria and the company's major shareholders. Victoria had been laying groundwork for months, subtly suggesting that James's leadership style might be too conservative for the company's future growth. She had presented herself as a modernizing influence, someone who could push James toward more aggressive expansion strategies. In the estate's security room, the head of James's personal security team watched multiple screens with growing concern. He observed Marcus Sinclair making calls in the garden, Eleanor's agitated pacing in the library, and Victoria's increasingly frequent consultations with her brother. Years of experience told him that multiple parties were maneuvering for advantage, each with their own agenda and none fully aware of what the others knew. The security chief also noticed how Thomas kept glancing at his phone, typing rapidly between conversations. A quick check of social media showed that the boy was already trending locally, with speculation about his identity spreading through various platforms. The situation was rapidly spinning beyond anyone's ability to control it. Back in the kitchen, Marie continued her story to the now captivated staff. She revealed how Rebecca had used the Montgomery money to complete her medical training, living frugally and investing the remainder to ensure Thomas would have opportunities. She never wanted him to feel disadvantaged, Marie explained. Every spare dollar went into his education and development. She was determined that if he ever met his father, he would be someone James could be proud of. The catering staff, many of whom came from working-class backgrounds, found themselves sympathizing with Rebecca's struggle to build a life for her son without the advantages of the Montgomery name. They watched as Thomas charmed guests in the main hall, displaying the natural grace that seemed inherent to both the Chen and Montgomery bloodlines. Jonathan Pierce, still on the phone with Eleanor, began outlining their options. The most concerning aspect wasn't the invalidation of the old agreement, but the paper trail it would reveal if challenged in court. Eleanor's threats against Rebecca's career, the coordinated pressure from hospital administrators, and the carefully orchestrated campaign to erase Rebecca from James's life, all of it could become public record. Thomas's discovery of James's car collection marked a pivotal moment in the unfolding drama at the Blackwood estate. The teenager had wandered away from the main reception, drawn to the large garage complex visible from the terrace. Through the massive windows, he could see the gleaming shapes of classic automobiles, a passion he'd developed through years of watching restoration shows and reading car magazines, never knowing he'd inherited this interest from his father. James found him there, standing in awe before a 1963 Aston Martin DB5, identical to the one Thomas had as a model car in his bedroom. The moment could have been awkward, but Thomas broke the ice with a detailed question about the car's original engine specifications. James, caught off guard by the boy's knowledge, found himself automatically slipping into teaching mode, a trait he'd developed from years of mentoring young executives. Rebecca watched this interaction from the garage entrance, her heart racing. She had spent 15 years protecting Thomas from the Montgomery world of wealth and privilege, believing it would only hurt him to know what he'd lost. Now, seeing him engage so naturally with James over their shared passion, she questioned whether her protection had become a form of deprivation. Victoria, ever strategic, seized this moment to orchestrate what she called a family dinner in the estate's formal dining room. The guest list was carefully curated: James, Rebecca, Thomas, Victoria, Eleanor, and a few key family members. The setting was deliberately intimidating: fine china, crystal glasses, and a full complement of servants. Victoria wanted Rebecca to feel the full weight of the world she'd walked away from. The dinner became a masterclass in passive-aggressive warfare. Eleanor commented on Rebecca's quaint choice to work at a small-town hospital, while Victoria expertly highlighted the contrast between Thomas's public school education and the private institutions the Montgomerys had attended for generations. Yet with each attempted slight, Thomas unconsciously displayed mannerisms so precisely matching James's that the similarities became impossible to ignore. James's business partner, Richard Kensington, observed the dinner with growing concern. He pulled James aside afterward to outline the legal implications of acknowledging Thomas as his heir. The company's major contracts included succession clauses that assumed Victoria's children would eventually take control. Any change to this assumption could trigger renegotiations or even cancellations. Later that evening, Richard approached Rebecca privately, offering what he called a solution. The conversation took place in the estate's conservatory, surrounded by Eleanor's prized orchids. His proposal was simple: a substantial trust fund for Thomas, managed anonymously in exchange for their permanent disappearance. Rebecca listened silently, her expression unreadable as Richard detailed the generous terms. Meanwhile, Thomas found himself drawn into conversation with Victoria's younger sister, Charlotte, who worked as an investment banker. She recognized in him the same sharp analytical mind that had made James successful, and began subtly testing his understanding of business concepts. To everyone's surprise, Thomas displayed an intuitive grasp of complex financial principles, another inherited trait that had manifested without nurture. The clash between Rebecca's modest lifestyle and the Montgomery wealth became increasingly apparent as the evening progressed. While Thomas adapted quickly to the luxury surrounding him, Rebecca struggled with watching her son navigate this world she'd deliberately kept him from. Every time he correctly identified a wine vintage or commented knowledgeably about the art on the walls, interests he'd developed independently, she felt a mix of pride and concern. Victoria, observing everything, began to see Rebecca not just as a threat, but as a potential ally. If managed correctly, Rebecca's presence could actually help Victoria's position. A public acknowledgement of Thomas, handled properly, could generate positive press and distract from the questions some board members had been raising about James's leadership style. The estate staff watched the power dynamics shift throughout the evening. They noticed how James unconsciously mirrored Thomas's posture when they sat together, how Eleanor's hands shook slightly whenever Thomas spoke in James's characteristic cadence, and how Victoria's calculated smiles became increasingly genuine as she identified ways to turn the situation to her advantage. As the evening wore on, various factions began to form. James's cousin Michael, who had always resented James's control of the company, saw an opportunity in Thomas's appearance. He began quietly suggesting to other family members that Thomas's fresh perspective might be exactly what the company needed. Victoria's father, sensing the shifting dynamics, started reconsidering whether his daughter's marriage to James was still the best way to merge their business interests. The clash of worlds extended beyond the immediate family. The estate's staff, many of whom had served the Montgomerys for years, found themselves divided in their loyalties. Some sympathized with Rebecca's decision to protect her son from this world of privilege and manipulation, while others believed Thomas had been robbed of his birthright. The discovery of the letters changed everything. James found them while searching through his father's old study, hidden in a false bottom of an antique desk drawer. The yellowed envelopes contained detailed correspondence between his mother Eleanor and various hospital administrators, outlining their coordinated effort to pressure Rebecca into leaving. Bank statements showed regular payments to private investigators who had monitored Rebecca's movements in those early months, ensuring she wouldn't attempt to contact James. The most damning document was a draft of the threat letter sent to Rebecca's residency program director. Eleanor had carefully crafted the message, suggesting that Rebecca's emotional instability and inappropriate relationship with a patient's family member made her unsuitable for the program. The letter never directly mentioned the pregnancy, but the implications were clear. Rebecca's career would be systematically destroyed if she didn't disappear. As James read through the evidence of his mother's manipulation, his hands shook with suppressed rage. Photos slipped from one envelope, surveillance images of a visibly pregnant Rebecca leaving her apartment, dated just weeks after she'd vanished from his life. The timestamps showed that Eleanor had known about Thomas's existence from the very beginning, choosing to hide the truth from her own son for 15 years. Meanwhile, Rebecca faced her own crisis as Thomas's questions about James became more pointed. During a quiet moment in the estate's garden, Thomas confronted her with the anger of a teenager who discovered a lifetime of omissions. "Did you think I wouldn't want to know my father?" he demanded. "That I couldn't handle knowing where I came from?" His voice cracked with emotion as he listed all the father-son moments he'd missed: graduations, sports games, science fairs where his projects won, but no father stood proud in the audience. Rebecca's carefully constructed justifications began to crumble. She'd told herself that protecting Thomas from the Montgomery wealth and influence was the right choice, that raising him to value hard work and integrity mattered more than material advantages. But watching him thrive in this environment, seeing how naturally he fit into James's world, forced her to confront the possibility that her protection had become a form of punishment. The situation grew more complex when Victoria received her pre-wedding medical results. The pregnancy test was positive, a development that should have been joyous news, but instead felt like a weapon in her hands. Her doctor's appointment had been scheduled strategically early, ensuring she'd have this information before the wedding. Victoria had never planned to trap James with a pregnancy, but now the timing seemed almost providential. Victoria spent hours in the estate's music room, absently playing the grand piano while weighing her options. The pregnancy could secure her position in the family, giving her child equal claim to Thomas as a Montgomery heir. Yet using this information felt wrong, especially after witnessing James's genuine connection with Thomas. The baby deserved to be welcomed with joy, not used as a bargaining chip in a power struggle. James's business partner, Richard, added another layer of complexity by revealing that several board members had already learned about Thomas. Their reactions ranged from concern about succession planning to excitement about having a backup heir, given their doubts about Victoria's business acumen. The company's stability hung in the balance, with major contracts and partnerships potentially at risk depending on how the situation was handled. Eleanor, discovering that James had found the letters, launched into damage control mode. She arranged a private meeting with Rebecca, attempting to justify her past actions as protecting both families. James wasn't ready to be a father then, she insisted. The company was in a delicate position. One scandal could have destroyed everything his father built. Her words rang hollow as Rebecca silently placed Thomas's childhood photos on the table, years of memories Eleanor had chosen to erase. The estate staff became unwitting participants in the unfolding drama. James's personal assistant found herself fielding calls from board members demanding confirmation of Thomas's paternity. The security team intercepted paparazzi attempting to photograph Thomas, while the household staff overheard fragments of crucial conversations. Each person who learned the truth became another potential leak in an increasingly unstable situation. Thomas, despite his age, showed remarkable maturity in handling the mounting tension. He focused on building a relationship with James while maintaining respectful distances from both Victoria and Eleanor. His instincts, inherited from both parents, helped him navigate the complex family dynamics. Yet even he couldn't hide his hurt when discovering photos of James's father at his age, seeing the striking three-generation resemblance that had been kept from him. The power outage at the Blackwood estate couldn't have come at a more pivotal moment. A summer storm had knocked out the main electrical lines, plunging the mansion into darkness just as tensions reached their peak. James and Rebecca found themselves trapped in his private study, the electronic security locks frozen in place. The backup generator would take 20 minutes to fully engage, 20 minutes that would change everything. In the dim light filtering through rain-streaked windows, the familiar walls of James's study felt like a confessional booth. The darkness seemed to strip away years of carefully constructed defenses, leaving them with nothing but raw truth between them. Rebecca sat in one of the leather chairs while James paced, their old patterns emerging unconsciously in the confined space. "I used to dream about this moment," James admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I imagined 100 different scenarios where you'd come back, but none of them involved my wedding day." He paused by the window, lightning briefly illuminating his face. "I hired private investigators, you know. Every few years I'd try again. They never found you." Rebecca's response came slowly, weighted with 15 years of carried secrets. She explained how she'd changed her name legally, not to Chen, but back to her grandmother's maiden name for those first crucial years. How she'd moved between small towns, working locum positions until Thomas was old enough for her to establish a permanent practice. The Montgomery money had remained untouched in an offshore account, her insurance policy against ever needing to expose Thomas to this world. Outside the study, Thomas discovered the hidden safe room by accident. He'd been exploring the estate's maze-like corridors, trying to process the day's revelations, when he noticed inconsistencies in the wood paneling of a second-floor hallway. The mechanism was old-fashioned, requiring no electricity, and the door swung open at his touch. Inside, he found a time capsule of his parents' relationship. James had preserved everything: ticket stubs from their first date at a medical school charity gala, candid photos capturing Rebecca's unguarded smiles, letters she'd written during their brief separation when James attended a business program in London. Most striking was a small velvet box containing an engagement ring dated just weeks before Rebecca's disappearance. The discovery of James's memory room affected Thomas deeply. Each preserved item revealed the depth of feeling between his parents, making their separation even more tragic. He found himself sitting on the floor, surrounded by evidence of a love story he should have been part of, trying to reconcile these artifacts with the careful distance his mother had always maintained when speaking of his father. Meanwhile, the shared passion for classic cars created unexpected bridges between father and son. During a break in the storm, they found themselves in the garage, heads bent together over the engine of the Aston Martin. James explained the intricacies of the restoration process, his hands moving with the same precise gestures Thomas used when working on his own modest car collection, model cars he'd assembled over years of birthdays and saved allowances. Rebecca and Victoria observed this scene from different vantage points, each woman processing what it meant for her future. Victoria recognized the genuine connection forming between James and Thomas, seeing how naturally they fell into a father-son dynamic. She watched James's face light up as Thomas demonstrated his knowledge of engine specifications, noting how this unguarded joy differed from his usual controlled business demeanor. The storm's enforced intimacy created other unexpected connections. Eleanor, seeking refuge from the darkened main halls, found herself sharing the kitchen with Marie, Rebecca's sister. Over cups of tea heated on the gas stove, they began a careful conversation about the past. Marie described Rebecca's struggles during her pregnancy, working hospital shifts until her 8th month, studying for boards while dealing with morning sickness. Eleanor, for the first time, heard about the grandson she'd chosen not to know. James and Rebecca's trapped moment in the study continued to unfold with revelations. Rebecca confessed that she'd attended James's father's funeral 3 years ago, standing at the back of the church, watching James deliver the eulogy. She'd seen how he'd grown into his role as company leader, how he'd handled the transition with grace and strength. "I almost told you then," she admitted. "Thomas had just won a regional science fair, and he reminded me so much of you at that moment." The power returned gradually, sections of the estate lighting up one by one like awakening memories. But something had shifted during those dark hours. Truths had been spoken that couldn't be unheard, connections forged that wouldn't easily break. The storm had forced a kind of intimacy that months of careful negotiations might never have achieved. Victoria's confrontation with James took place in his home office the morning after the power outage. She arrived armed with a USB drive containing documents that could destroy not just James's reputation, but the entire Montgomery business empire. Her investigation had uncovered irregularities in the company's environmental compliance reports, suggesting a pattern of deliberate violations spanning several years. "I don't want to use this," Victoria stated, placing the drive on James's desk. "But I will if you try to cancel our wedding or change the terms of our prenuptial agreement because of Thomas." Her voice remained steady, but her fingers trembled slightly as she outlined exactly what she'd found: falsified environmental impact studies, buried reports of contamination at 2 manufacturing sites, and emails suggesting senior management had known about these issues for years. Simultaneously, Rebecca faced her own showdown with Eleanor in the estate's conservatory. Thomas, tech-savvy and suspicious of his grandmother's past actions, had positioned himself in the garden outside, his phone recording every word through the slightly opened window. Eleanor, unaware of her audience, spoke freely about the measures she'd taken to separate Rebecca from James. "I did what was necessary," Eleanor declared, her voice sharp with defensive pride. James was barely 26, the company was in transition, and the board was looking for any excuse to force him out. A pregnant girlfriend from the wrong social circle would have been the perfect ammunition for his opponents. She detailed the threats she'd made, the careers she'd ruined to serve as examples to Rebecca, the web of influence she'd wielded to ensure her son's future. The situation reached a critical point when Thomas, driving one of James's vintage cars with permission, lost control on a rain-slicked road near the estate. The accident itself wasn't severe, but it created an immediate medical crisis. The local hospital required parental authorization for the minor's treatment, forcing James to make a decisive choice about acknowledging his paternity. Rebecca arrived at the hospital first, her medical training evident as she quickly assessed Thomas's condition, but hospital policy required both parents' signatures for the proposed treatment, a precautionary MRI to rule out internal injuries. James stood in the hospital corridor, Victoria on one side and his mother on the other, each offering contradicting advice about the legal implications of signing the forms. The confrontation spilled into the hospital waiting room, where Victoria revealed her pregnancy to Rebecca, wielding it as both threat and negotiation tool. "This baby will be James's legal heir," she announced, watching Rebecca's reaction carefully. "We can find a way to include Thomas in the family, but it has to be on our terms." Richard, James's business partner, arrived at the hospital with a team of lawyers, presenting various documents for James to sign: statements denying paternity, agreements to keep the situation private, contracts that would protect the company's interests. Each paper represented a different way to escape the current crisis, but each also required James to deny his connection to Thomas. The hospital scene became increasingly chaotic as more players arrived. Victoria's brother Marcus appeared with his own set of documents, evidence he claimed would prove Rebecca had attempted to extort money from the Montgomerys years ago. Eleanor's lawyer rushed in with injunctions designed to prevent any public acknowledgement of Thomas's parentage. Security teams from both families tried to manage the growing media presence outside as news of the accident spread. Rebecca, watching the circus unfold around her son's hospital bed, finally reached her breaking point. Her voice, trained to remain calm during medical emergencies, cut through the chaos. She revealed her own collection of evidence, diary entries, photographs, and medical records that proved Eleanor's manipulation. More importantly, she had documentation showing that the money Eleanor had paid her had been invested in a trust for Thomas, never touched for personal use. The revelation about the trust fund shifted the dynamic dramatically. Victoria's carefully constructed narrative of Rebecca as a potential extortionist crumbled. The trust's existence, and Rebecca's careful stewardship of it, demonstrated a level of integrity that none of the Montgomerys had expected. This revelation forced everyone in the hospital room to reevaluate their assumptions and strategies. Victoria's suggested compromise came during a private meeting in the estate's library, carefully timed while Thomas was recovering from his injuries. Her proposal seemed elegantly simple. Thomas would be acknowledged as James's son, but would remain in Rebecca's primary custody. He would receive educational opportunities, access to the Montgomery name, and a place in the family business hierarchy, all while Victoria maintained her position as James's wife and the future mother of his children. The details of the arrangement were meticulously crafted. Thomas would attend the prestigious Westfield Academy, alma mater of 3 generations of Montgomerys. He would intern at the company during summers, learning the business from the ground up. Victoria positioned herself as the architect of this integration, presenting herself to the board members as a mature leader capable of handling complex family dynamics. James began spending time with Thomas under the guise of mentorship. They would meet in the garage, ostensibly discussing cars while James carefully shared insights about the business world. These moments felt stolen and precious, a father teaching his son without being able to fully acknowledge their relationship publicly. James convinced himself that this careful dance was sustainable, that they could build a meaningful relationship within these constraints. The company's legal team drafted a series of documents establishing Thomas's position without explicitly confirming his paternity. He would be listed as a family associate, granted certain privileges and responsibilities without triggering the succession clauses in major contracts. James believed they had found a clever solution, a way to have everything without risking anything. Rebecca, exhausted from years of protecting Thomas alone, allowed herself to imagine a different future. She saw Thomas thriving in James's world, developing the business acumen that seemed to run in his blood. The weight of secrecy began to lift, replaced by a tentative hope that they could create a new kind of family structure, one that would give Thomas the opportunities she'd always wanted for him. Victoria orchestrated carefully controlled public appearances, presenting a united front to the media. She arranged photo opportunities, showing James mentoring Thomas, casting herself as the generous stepmother figure. Each appearance was calculated to generate positive press while maintaining plausible deniability about Thomas's true relationship to the family. Meanwhile, Victoria's brother Marcus continued his investigation, now with a different purpose. Instead of looking for ammunition against Rebecca, he began building a case against potential threats to this new arrangement. He monitored social media, tracked press coverage, and maintained surveillance on anyone who might disrupt the careful balance they'd achieved. Eleanor, initially resistant to the compromise, found herself warming to the idea. As she watched Thomas interact with James, she began including Thomas in family traditions, teaching him about the Montgomery history and legacy. These moments allowed her to partially atone for her past actions while maintaining the public fiction that protected the family's interests. The company's board members responded positively to the arrangement. They saw Thomas's presence as a potential asset, a young man with his father's natural business instincts who could be groomed for a future role without disrupting the current power structure. Several key investors even suggested that having multiple potential successors strengthened the company's long-term stability. Thomas, still recovering from his accident, threw himself into learning about the Montgomery business empire. He spent hours studying company reports, asking intelligent questions that impressed even the most skeptical board members. His natural aptitude for business, combined with his mother's instilled work ethic, made him an ideal student of corporate leadership. Rebecca reluctantly accepted a position on the board of the Montgomery Foundation, the family's charitable arm. This role provided a legitimate reason for her continued presence in Thomas's life at the company, while maintaining professional distance from James. She told herself this compromise would give Thomas the best of both worlds, access to opportunities while staying grounded in the values she'd taught him. The carefully constructed facade crumbled when Thomas's recording of Eleanor's confession went viral. It started with a single social media post, an audio clip of Eleanor admitting to orchestrating Rebecca's departure, threatening her career, and manipulating James for years. Within hours, the recording spread across multiple platforms, picked up by news outlets and social media influencers, fascinated by the intersection of wealth, power, and family drama. The fallout was immediate and severe. Eleanor's detailed confession exposed not just the personal manipulation, but hinted at broader corporate misconduct. She had mentioned using company resources to track Rebecca, leveraging business connections to threaten her career, and misappropriating funds to pay for her silence. Each revelation sparked new investigations and inquiries. Financial journalists began digging into the Montgomery Company's past, uncovering patterns of corporate governance issues that went beyond Eleanor's personal vendetta. The company's stock price fluctuated wildly as investors tried to assess the potential damage. Trading was temporarily suspended twice in one day as the market struggled to price in the rapidly unfolding scandal. Victoria's pregnancy announcement, strategically leaked to sympathetic media outlets, initially seemed like a perfect countermove. The story of the Montgomery heir expecting their first child should have dominated the news cycle. Instead, it became entangled with questions about succession rights, Thomas's legal status, and the legitimacy of various corporate contracts contingent on clear succession plans. Rebecca found herself thrust into an unwanted spotlight when Victoria's brother's investigation surfaced. The carefully crafted narrative painting Rebecca as an extortionist fell apart under scrutiny. Bank records showed she had never touched the Montgomery money, instead investing it in a trust for Thomas's education. Her modest lifestyle and dedicated medical career contradicted any suggestion of gold-digging motives. The company's board called an emergency meeting as institutional investors demanded clarity. James faced difficult questions about his knowledge of past events and his plans for future leadership. Board members were divided. Some saw Thomas as a liability to be managed, others as an asset representing a fresh start for the company's image. The uncertainty threatened major contracts and partnerships. Social media exploded with competing narratives. Montgomery Hair and Thomas Truth trended nationally as people took sides in the family drama. Old photos of James and Rebecca from their early relationship surfaced, along with school records showing Thomas's academic achievements. The public narrative shifted rapidly, with Rebecca and Thomas increasingly cast as sympathetic figures rather than threats to the Montgomery legacy. Corporate communications teams worked desperately to control the narrative, but each statement seemed to trigger new revelations. When they emphasized Victoria's pregnancy as representing the company's future, anonymous sources leaked medical records suggesting the pregnancy might be fabricated. When they tried to distance the company from Eleanor's actions, former employees came forward with stories of similar corporate strong-arm tactics. The crisis deepened as major business partners began invoking contract clauses requiring stable leadership succession. 2 significant deals were put on hold, pending clarification of the company's future structure. Competitors seized the opportunity to approach key clients, suggesting that the Montgomery Empire's family drama made them an unreliable business partner. Legal teams from all sides scrambled to manage the fallout. Eleanor's recorded confession raised questions about the validity of numerous past agreements. The non-disclosure agreement she had forced Rebecca to sign was now obviously unenforceable, freeing Rebecca to tell her full story. Each new legal challenge threatened to expose more of the family's carefully buried secrets. The shareholders' meeting at Montgomery Corp's headquarters became the arena for the final confrontation. The boardroom, typically a place of measured corporate governance, crackled with tension as James faced the most crucial decision of his career. On one side sat the institutional investors who controlled nearly 40% of the company's voting shares. On the other, family shareholders who had backed the Montgomerys for generations. The terms were brutally simple: either publicly deny Thomas as his son and maintain control of the company, or acknowledge him and face a potential vote of no confidence. The institutional investors, led by Warren Harrison of Apex Capital, argued that the uncertainty surrounding succession plans had already cost them millions in market capitalization. They presented a detailed analysis showing how the company's stock had dropped 15% since Thomas's existence became public. James stood at the head of the conference table, documents spread before him. Each paper represented a different path forward: succession plans that excluded Thomas, statements refuting paternity, agreements that would effectively erase his son from the Montgomery legacy. His hand hovered over them as the board members waited in tense silence. Victoria's dramatic entrance interrupted the proceedings. Her face pale but composed, she walked directly to the center of the boardroom and revealed what many had already suspected. Her pregnancy had been fabricated, a desperate attempt to secure her position in the family. More shocking was her revelation that Eleanor had helped orchestrate the deception, seeing it as necessary to protect the company's stability. The confrontation that followed exposed years of manipulation. Eleanor, finally forced to defend her actions publicly, tried to justify her decades of deception as necessary for the company's survival. She revealed how she'd orchestrated not just Rebecca's departure, but had manipulated numerous other threats to the family's control over the years. Each admission weakened her position further, until even her longtime allies on the board began distancing themselves. Thomas's attempt to run away during this chaos served as a brutal wake-up call. The teenager, overwhelmed by the weight of corporate politics and family dysfunction, packed a bag and left a note explaining he wanted no part of the Montgomery legacy. His absence forced all parties to confront the human cost of their power struggles. The search for Thomas became a media circus. News helicopters tracked search parties through the Montgomery estate's grounds. Social media exploded with reported sightings. James, for the first time, openly acted as a father, leading the search efforts personally and damning the consequences to his corporate image. Rebecca found Thomas first, at the small apartment where they'd lived when he was young. The conversation that followed stripped away the veneer of corporate politics and family legacy. Thomas expressed his fear of becoming another Montgomery pawn, while Rebecca confronted her own role in denying him a relationship with his father. Back at the company, the board remained deadlocked. The institutional investors threatened to sell their shares en masse, while family shareholders rallied around James's right to acknowledge his son. The company's stock price swung wildly as trading algorithms attempted to price in every new development. The dissolution of James and Victoria's engagement came not with a dramatic announcement, but through a simple press release on a Tuesday morning. The statement, crafted with careful precision, spoke of mutual respect and different life paths. But within hours, James made his real priorities clear by calling a press conference where he publicly acknowledged Thomas as his son and heir. The business consequences were immediate and severe. 3 board members resigned in protest, 2 major contracts required immediate renegotiation, and the company's stock dropped 20% in a single day. Yet James stood firm, working 18-hour days to stabilize the company while making time every evening to have dinner with Thomas, building the relationship they should have had for years. The creation of the Montgomery Family Foundation marked a turning point. Rebecca's appointment as executive director wasn't just a professional courtesy. Her experience in healthcare and education shaped the foundation's mission to support medical training for underprivileged students. The position allowed her to maintain her independence while giving Thomas the chance to know both his parents. The co-parenting arrangement that emerged surprised everyone with its effectiveness. Rebecca's practical approach complemented James's business acumen, creating a balanced environment for Thomas's development. They established clear boundaries. Their romantic past remained firmly in the past, replaced by a partnership focused entirely on their son's well-being. Thomas's internship at Montgomery Corp became a symbol of the company's new direction. Starting in the mailroom, he worked his way through different departments, learning the business from the ground up. Employees noted how he combined James's strategic thinking with Rebecca's compassion for others, creating his own leadership style. Eleanor's role shifted dramatically. While she remained on the board, her influence was curtailed. She found unexpected fulfillment in mentoring young businesswomen, using her experience, both positive and negative, to guide the next generation away from her past mistakes. Her relationship with Thomas evolved slowly, marked by honest conversations about the past and cautious hope for the future. Victoria emerged from the scandal with surprising resilience. She channeled her business acumen into launching a successful corporate consulting firm specializing in family business dynamics and succession planning. Her insights, shaped by her experience with the Montgomerys, made her a sought-after expert in corporate governance. The company's transformation extended beyond family dynamics. James implemented new transparency policies, made corporate governance reforms, and established ethical guidelines that became industry standards. The Montgomery name, once synonymous with old money and closed doors, began representing progressive corporate leadership. 1 year after the wedding that never was, Thomas stood at a podium during the company's annual shareholder meeting. His presentation on sustainable business practices and ethical leadership drew on lessons learned from both his parents, Rebecca's dedication to serving others, and James's business innovations. The standing ovation he received marked not just personal success, but the beginning of a new Montgomery legacy. The final scene at the estate's garage, where James and Thomas worked together on restoring classic cars, became a regular weekend ritual. Rebecca often joined them, bringing coffee and contributing her own mechanical knowledge, learned from years of maintaining her old hospital car. Their conversations ranged from business strategy to personal dreams, creating the family bonds that no amount of wealth could buy. In the end, the Montgomery legacy was redefined not by scandal or wealth, but by the courage to choose truth over tradition, family over facade, and love over legacy. Thomas's journey from hidden son to acknowledged heir became a story not of inheritance, but of authenticity, proving that the greatest family legacies are built on honesty, regardless of the cost.